Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's a very packed room, but we are going to get started because we've only got up until 2 o'clock. If you don't have a seat, there are listening rooms everywhere on the 5th floor. Feel free to go down and tune in from there. The usual housekeeping, I'm sure you've all been here for the last couple of days. Microphone, yeah? It's not working? Okay. The usual bit of housekeeping, there is translation. English is channel 2 and French is channel 3. We want you all to tweet and use social media, use the regular hashtag EuropeCom. And with that, we'll get cracking. This session is about the lessons we've learned and what we're looking forward, and looking forward together are the two big themes that we want to get across, but also we want to hear everyone's ideas. And our very experienced panelists will soak up those ideas and give you feedback and tell you what they've felt over the last couple of days. So let me introduce then Yaomen Duke, who is spokesperson and Director General of Communication from the European Parliament. To my right is Paul Riederman, Director for Media and Communication within the General Secretariat of the Council of the European Union. Nice snappy title. And here we have Pia Ankilde Hansen, who is Director General for Communication at the European Commission. So all institutions thoroughly represented. I'll let you all sort of give some opening comments and then we'll get into questions and discussion. So, Jan, I'll let you go first.
Thank you very much. Thanks again for the invitation. Second in a row, thank you to the organizers and to all the participants for yet another successful EuropeCom session. During the last 10 years, this excellent project has been developing in parallel to the growing importance of communication itself. Can good communication make a real impact and make the difference? Yes, it can, and I think that this year's European elections are a proof of that. To illustrate what I'm saying, let me mention a couple of figures. I know that there was a discussion in one of the workshops, but I think it's good to remind this. First, our communication campaign about the importance of the European elections focused specifically on several carefully selected target groups in each member state. The general turnout was, as you know, 50.6%, but the turnout for those target groups that we were selecting was 8 points higher. It was 58.3%. Second, almost half of the Europeans, 44%, recall seeing or hearing messages from the European Parliament or from the other institutions, because we work together on this, encouraging them to vote. More importantly, national turnouts differ significantly among the people who recall our campaign messages and those who do not. The impact of our campaign video, that's the third element that I would like to share with you. The impact of our campaign video, Choose Your Future, the video to mobilize voters, is also a good example. Across all member states, people who had seen the video were more likely to have voted. These are figures which come from one of our last Eurobarometers. And these figures are important. They demonstrate that institutional communication has evolved dramatically, and that our understanding of what institutional communication should be is no longer what it was 10, 5, or even 2 years ago. I will not get into all the details of this, of course, but I would like to mention two key recent joint echo during the various EuropeCom sessions over the past 2 days. First, the need of a clear narrative, a clear vision. Yesterday, I heard Catherine de Vries say that if we demonstrate that Europe stands for something, then people will not fall for something else, meaning probably Euroscepticism. And I agree with this notion fully. When we were communicating about the European elections, our narrative wasn't just about voting. It was also about the idea of defending democracy itself. Voting is just the most tangible realization of this idea. And so our communication is no longer just about the European Parliament, what the Parliament is, what the Parliament does. We also need to tell the grander story of what it stands for. The decisions taken by the European Parliament have a strong impact on the lives of the citizens, yes, but perhaps even more important is that they are legitimate. They are legitimate because they are the result of a fully democratic process. Whether these decisions are seen as beneficial or detrimental, they have been subject to a pan-European debate, to consideration and to decision by the elected representatives of the European people. And both the legislative power of the European Parliament and the democratic process that it embodies are ultimately there at the service of one thing, the European people, that has been mandated to represent via its elected members. This is what democracy is about, and this is what, again, we stand for. I should add that this element also brings a more emotional appeal to our communication, and as we know, we all share this idea, emotions are always stronger than just facts. Second, and this is, I think, the main message from our side, communication is not something we can do alone. We need to reach out to others to help us spread our messages. We have to create partnerships and help others to help us communicate. As I said yesterday, communicating Europe is a shared responsibility. This is something the institutions cannot do alone anymore and shouldn't do alone anymore. We need the active contribution of many different stakeholders, such as civil society interest groups, NGOs, public and private organizations, but also, of course, media, and why not celebrities, and of course the citizens themselves. All of them have a stake in Europe, and it's in all their interest also to communicate about it. Maybe not on the same ideas, maybe not to the same audiences, but on issues that relate to Europe nonetheless. These partners are key in helping us reach out to different, to wider, and to more diverse audiences, but also to giving more credibility to the message. In a world where experts and institutions are no longer trusted, or not as trusted as some years ago, the most credible interlocutor has become the person like me. So we need to engage citizens who are passionate about the European Union and about European democracy to help us convince their peers. Dear friends, the 10th anniversary of Europecom is a good moment to renew our commitment to our profession. It has been a long way since 2009, and a lot is still to be done, I'm afraid. The fact that during the last European elections, for the first time since 1994, a majority of citizens decided to participate and vote is a sign of hope, because it shows that there is an increased interest in the future of Europe. But it's also an extra responsibility. It's an extra responsibility for all the European institutions, for all of us. With their vote, the European citizens mandated the members of the Parliament, and through them the new European Commission, the new Commission College, and they want results on many issues, from employment to climate change, from migration to social policies. The citizens expect concrete results. And of course, this is not within our remit. We are not the politicians, we haven't been elected, but we share the burden with them. Because there's no democratic legitimacy if there is no accountability. And there is no accountability without the real knowledge about what the European Union does, or what the European Parliament or the European Union doesn't do. In the coming months and years, you will see many important decisions will be taken on the future EU budget, on the deepening of our democratic instruments, on a Green Deal to fight against climate change, and on many, many other things. Please keep helping us in establishing good channels of communication with our fellow Europeans. As many neutral, factual, efficient, and interactive channels as possible. There is a saying which says, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I don't think there's a better way to express the cumulative strength we all have in communicating the incredible project that is the European Union. So again, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your attention, for the job that you have been doing until now, and for the job, the work to be done in the next years. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I will turn now to Paul to give your thoughts. I'm sure there'll be a lot of overlap in comments, but we will deal with that as we get to it.
Or maybe not.
Controversial.
Jennifer, thank you, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and with you this morning. The theme of these 2 days has been looking forward, and I suppose putting us on a panel at the end is about looking forward together. And I think there are a couple of core messages from Jaume that I can certainly subscribe to in terms of looking forward together. And those are that I think it's clear that there is a shared responsibility for communicating the Union. I don't think that's disputed. I think you see a very clear echo of that in the Bratislava Declaration of Heads of State and Government. You see that in the declaration on the 60th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, and you see it on the renewal of the institutions this year, where all of the future heads of our institutions are clearly aligned on that need for a shared responsibility. And secondly, Jaume, you're completely right that that responsibility has to be based around a positive message, and not a defensive message, not a technocratic message, but an overarching positive message. But talking to some of you in between sessions and listening to some of the sessions the last couple of days, I feel there's a strand of opinion. I wouldn't say it's a majority strand of opinion, but there's a question which is often asked of us, and that is, well, shouldn't looking forward together mean some pretty basic things like speaking with one voice for the institutions? Shouldn't it mean some things like having a much more completely aligned messaging? And there, it's very tempting to say, yes, it should, but I would caution against that a little bit. I think there are some good reasons why, although we keep to that principle of a shared responsibility and a positive message, that the messaging itself has to be subtly different from the institutions. And there are good reasons why that should be so. First of all, our institutions represented here on this table represent different interests of the Union, each with their own legitimacy. Each of those institutions will have a different take on any particular policy issue, and each of those institutions will want to communicate on that different take. We shouldn't be afraid of those differences. One of the things that makes the Union interesting are the differences. This is a political sphere, and we shouldn't apologise for that. If there are differences between the Parliament and the Council, that's what makes headlines sometimes. That's what gets people interested in the Union. The fact that the Parliament's elections were there to make a difference is evidence of that. So let's not think that looking forward together means we're going to have a kind of Politburo kind of single message on everything. In future it won't. That's not how different political entities in other parts of the world speak. You wouldn't expect parliaments and governments or different houses of the US Congress to have exactly the same message, and I don't think that's the way we're headed here either. Secondly, messaging is really only the tip of the iceberg for communication professionals here in the institutions. And there's an awful lot that happens below the waterline. It's often just as important, often just as interesting, and here there is actually a lot of collaboration and joint work between the institutions, but maybe there could be more still. We had one small example of it yesterday here at EuropeCom, where the institutions jointly launched their Spotify account. I look at another example earlier this year, where it was the institutions acting together in response to a change of policy of Facebook, where it tightened its rules on advertising, that meant that we were able to have an impact. And I'm sure that Facebook would have much preferred the institutions to have been divided, to have said different things, and for Facebook simply to have got away with what it wanted. But we came together, we had a single line on that, and we pushed back on it. So I think there's a big and unyet fully explored potential for collaboration among the institutions there, pooling our knowledge, our resources, and seeing what we can do in addition on those kind of issues. So there are some really big strategic issues there, and the regulation of the social media space is a very big one of them. Should we allow tech giants to be able to decide on the rules of free speech essentially on their own, with no barriers to the way in which misinformation can spread across platforms? I don't think so. I don't think that's the view of my colleagues on this panel either. And I think these are going to be some interesting issues to look at together in the next 5 years. But there are some more gritty things as well where we could work together. Community management online. Resources for communication in all the institutions are limited. And there are some things that we have to do which are pretty similar. Should we look at, for example, jointly developing some technical solutions? Should we look at, see how we could work together on chatbots for social media? Looking at AI as a tool for the future. So there are just a few examples and some ideas. I think there's actually, on the basis of the conversations that we've had in the past few months and our teams have had, actually a lot of common ground in terms of where we see communication of the institutions going. And that's echoed in many of the panels that we've had the last couple of days. Everybody agrees it has to be more appealing. Everybody agrees it must be more directly relevant to citizens. Everybody agrees that overtly political messaging has an impact. The personal and the localized work and the engaging work as well. So there, I think we're pushing forward in the same ways. In terms of a negative agenda, we know we have some issues we have to work on together. I've mentioned disinformation, propaganda, bots, trolls. One I think that we need to look at again together, which I'm quite concerned about, is deep fakes. I think it will be increasingly easy and increasingly dangerous in the coming years to see spread on social media fake videos of the President of the Commission or the President of the European Council, and I think we have to be ready for that and ready to track those videos, stop their proliferation. So again, lots of work still to do there. Finally, I think we need to move away a little bit from the situation we've inevitably been in the last 5 or 8 years, which is moving from crisis to crisis. We're just perhaps exiting that that era, hopefully, and that will allow us, I think, to focus on how we as institutions in our communication can continue to be creative and innovative. Again, a big theme that I've heard yesterday and today. Encouraging our colleagues sometimes to take risks if they want to survive. And in trying to foster creativity, nothing kills that creativity more than committees. We all know it. The best communication products are not really the the outcome of hours of civil servants sitting together in committees. So if we want to keep it political, if we want to keep it fresh and engaging, let's try to keep the lines short. Let's try to allow a little bit of risk-taking in the institutions. Gone are the days when we thought we could produce things that everybody will like. We shouldn't be frightened of saying things that not everybody likes. We should be delighted, frankly, if we say some things that some people hate and take offence to. If we can do engaging communication for the 80% of people who are either very pro-European or softly pro-European, then I think we will have succeeded. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to lose one of our panelists, so we will say goodbye and thank you very much. I will say you can still interact with us on social media even while you're catching your train. Okay. And that goes also for everyone who's watching at home. We are live streamed. Use the hashtag. I will try and keep an eye on Twitter if you have any questions as well. Pia, now over to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and good morning again, or good afternoon rather, because we've reached the afternoon in the meantime, colleagues and fellow communicators. I'm really happy to be with you at the closing session, even if I realize, separating you from lunch possibly isn't the most ideal communication situation, but I'll give it a go anyway. And with Jaume having left, I can probably get away with even repeating some of his messages, right? I'll try to do it in brief. There's been much reference to the European elections, of course, during these 2 days, and the lessons that we as communicators can draw from them. And as we heard already at the opening of these rich 2 days, one thing that was different, in addition to the turnout so positively getting on the good side of 50, was that it was fought on European rather than national issues this time round. So this time round it was different. And we heard some explanations. I'm not going to repeat them, but I do think that the voters did send us communicators a clear message. They care about Europe, they have clear expectations, and they want to be part of shaping Europe's future. And actually, in addition to the election results that Jaume also went back on, we have also recent Eurobarometer figures that actually show that we have the highest number ever of Europeans now agreeing with the statement that their voice counts in Europe, something that we also featured, of course, very much in the Commission's priority of a union of democratic exchange. 65% of Europeans in some countries, and 56% in the EU as a whole now believe that this statement is true, that their voice is heard and counts in the European Union. So that's definitely also, in addition to the election results, a good indication of the engagement and how Europeans want to be engaged in shaping Europe's future. So, contrary to what some believe, and it was expressed in the opening by some, even if it's sometimes very challenging to express a direct correlation between what we do communicating Europe and indeed how people then behave, for example, in elections, even if Jaume gave precisely some evidence of this right now. We definitely can be confident that communication did play some role for how people engaged in the election. And we can also, while of course not being complacent and the challenge is huge, we can be confident that we can make a difference if we accept that indeed communication about the European Union is a shared challenge among all of us who are in this room now, and of course way beyond. It's a responsibility of all the institutions and of the member states alike, including, and I would say especially maybe, excuse me, local and regional actors and civil society. So the discussion here, both in this 10th edition of EuropeCom and over the years in the workshops and events and in the margins, show, at least that's also what I have very much heard at the time that I've spent here this time and previously, you are ready and people are increasingly ready to embrace and strengthen our joint communication efforts. And this was also precisely a message that we, the European Commission, were able to pass to the leaders when they gathered back in the spring, in May, in Sibiu in Romania, where we emphasized there, as both Jaume and Paul have also alluded to it, Europe is everybody's business, and we are all stakeholders in Europe's future, of course, and therefore the story about how the EU delivers, how it's benefiting and impacting on the lives of citizens and stakeholders is a story that is not just told from Brussels. It has to be told by all the stakeholders and, of course, the leaders in member states, regions, and local communities. We've had the corporate communication campaigns like EU Protects, EU and Me, or also things that we've put out showing a day in the life of EU citizens that have provided content from our side in our campaigns to assist us when we have been communicating on the side of the European Commission, and these have deliberately been designed as EU campaigns and not a campaign from one individual institution. And therefore, it's also my pleasure once again to extend an invitation to all of you to dig into the material that we have available, which of course, even if it's much of it designed here, it's also tailored through the help of people on the ground to national realities. And, you know, so we can really be confident that it can be used in different networks, also because it's in of course, crucially different languages to help amplifying the central messages about what the EU stands for and what difference it makes in people's lives. And from our perspective, we think that it's crucial that we maintain the momentum that enhanced cooperation between the institutions has delivered, with, of course, the Parliament in the lead, running the election campaigns, obviously, but also going beyond the elections, and that we build on these different partnerships that we have fostered with member states at all levels, civil society, with interest groups, as, of course, they were all key to the success or the progress in voter turnout in the European elections, and how the mobilization was different also in quality. So we should also, when we do this between institutions, between different actors on EU communication, we should play to our strengths, we should be complementary, we should duplicate less what we do and share more what we do. We've also been very keen to encourage in our communication recommendations recently that we should encourage more direct engagement with citizens, something that, of course, was borne out in many citizens' dialogues and consultations in this Commission's mandates, and engaging many both national and local actors on the way, and engaging precisely citizens more directly on both policies and their key concerns. Of course, communicating on what matters to citizens is really key to get them interested, of course. And this has been a main leitmotif, I would say, during this Commission. Our President-elect, Ursula von der Leyen, has definitely reinforced this, also in her strong conviction presented in her political guidelines that European democracy needs to be able to thrive also beyond and between the European elections. Also, as Paul was hinting at, or more than hinting at, that he was arguing on difficult and controversial issues. And in the mission letters to her future team members, Ursula von der Leyen made very clear that she wanted to bring Europe closer to home, and called upon all the future members of the college to actually go out there, not only to the capitals, but also into the regions, places where the face of Europe perhaps has not been shown as visibly always before, in corners of Europe, so that everywhere, indeed, the debate can take place and the engagement can happen. And the planned conference on the future of Europe and also our continuation of citizens' dialogues and consultations, where we hope to bring more innovative and strengthened formats into the equation, will facilitate this. It's about listening. It's about building understanding and ownership. I mean, because the European Union belongs to every European. So this is what it's about, ensuring that citizens' hands gets strengthened when it comes to shaping EU policy making, when it comes to shaping the future of Europe. And so finally, of course, even if it's far down out in the horizon, we already need to think about and have on the horizon the next European elections. And I hope, of course, along with other speakers who have said it before me, that we can make in the year 2024, of course, even further progress on voter turnout. 51% was, or almost 51% was a very good result, but aiming higher should of course be the objective of all of us. As I was saying, European democracy has a very central place in our president-elect's political guidelines. It has even a central place in portfolios attributed in the next commission with a future vice president specifically responsible for democracy and demography, but also other members of the college responsible one way or the other indeed for democracy, which in the end, of course, is the responsibility of all college members, as it is, of course, the very direct business of all the members of the European Parliament directly elected. So in this respect, and that's the final, let's say, anchor point in our communication recommendations, fighting disinformation is also something that we should pay very careful attention to as we move forward, because indeed this is key to preserve our public information space, and indeed it's not new, but the means that disinformation is propagated and the speed at which it travels these days means that our joint efforts here too needs to keep a pace and stay ahead of the game. So building resilience precisely with some of the communication that we are collectively fielding and making available and engaging in is part of this, so that we can actually build resilience, but also empower citizens with this knowledge, with this information, and engage them also emotionally, so that they can make informed choices based on facts when the next election comes up. So this was really what I wanted to share with you, mentioning perhaps concretely an initiative that we'll be taking, which is a kind of online hub on disinformation that we will be working to build, that will put together the different streams of work on disinformation ongoing in the EU, where we want to really use transparency as a strong weapon in the fight against disinformation. So this is an online effort, but something that I very much count on being a collective and also interinstitutional effort that will help preserve and strengthen our European democracy. So, but okay, enough from me. Can I conclude maybe with a slide that kind of sums it up very, very perhaps some very simple together when it comes to communicating Europe. They are kind of self-explanatory, and they make a nice combination of letters, as you can see, I hope. Yes, it's there. And the first one is, of course, the emblem, because we actually have a flag that we can use to identify and build identity for the European Union. And this is something that really unifies and unites us, I think, and we can make it more visible in the future. We spoke, of course, about the importance of allowing debate, controversy to have more space in the European Union. So when we speak about unifying messaging, that is not in a contradiction. We are simply here referring to the issue that also came up yesterday in the opening, and Jaume referred to it, what Europe stands for, the fundamentals, you know, the fact that the Parliament in the campaign, and we joined up, and I think all the institutions joined, that this time I'm voting, you know, message, you know, that kind of unifying messaging is really effective when it comes to milestone moments for our European Union, when it comes to really getting across, let's say, the heart, the backbone of what the European Union stands for. And then real stories of real people. I mentioned it in relation to our so-called corporate communication. This is something we can share, giving the human angle a very, very central place in our communication is something that will engage people. And people are what we should be speaking more about. We speak about and to and with ordinary citizens in ordinary language. It's something that is a daily challenge to us who produce policies, because policies are complex, and we need to be able to speak to people and with people about what they mean in the language that they speak. And the personal localized content is, and going local about communicating into the context where people are, is of course very essential, and also something that we will be seeking to practice more. And I mentioned it as the final point, and maybe the most important point. Let's not just be dry and factual. Let's also use and show some more emotion in our communication. So this would be my final point. Thank you very much.
Okay, it was quite... I'm looking at the clock, so we have maybe time for one or two questions. Has anyone got something that they want to raise now that they absolutely cannot go home without having it answered? Okay, right, good. Okay, in that case, let me ask a question to the audience with a show of hands. We've talked a little bit about the new channels, the social media channels, the different methods of communication. And obviously they're a tool that can be used, but they also create an awful lot of problems with regarding to countering disinformation. So I'd like to know, on balance, are they helpful or are they a burden? And you have to pick one or the other. So hands up, everyone who thinks they're helpful, on balance. Okay. And, okay. Hands up, everyone who thinks they are not helpful and they are actually a problem and a challenge. No one thinks they're a challenge in this whole room. Oh, the question, okay. Do you think new channels such as social media, are helpful on balance or are a problem on balance? Helpful? A problem? Yeah, still very few people think they're a problem. Okay, so I wanted to ask Paul and Pia, are you surprised by that, or do you agree with the general view?
In a sense, it doesn't matter whether they're helpful or a problem. They're there. It's a fact of life. The European Union may be able to do lots of things, but it's not going to disinvent social media channels. So we've got to work with them in the best way that we can.
Well, little to disagree with there. I mean, let's embrace it, but indeed, let's equip ourselves to embrace it. I was speaking about disinfo here in my last message, and I think that is actually key. You know, getting better at preventing or making it more difficult for those who want to propagate, let's say, their disinformation via these terribly effective challenge, because I think that's key, so that we can get better at helping each other to do. And we have actually put a few instruments in place already that can enable each other to do so. But also in our communication, let's make it much more difficult for people to take root, through their disinformation campaigns. And that we do, I think, with precisely building these strong, positive but also documented narratives that we should share more, so that they get a more difficult job in distorting and destabilizing our communication.
Okay, then I'll ask a final question before we hear our wrap-up speech, and I'll try and be a bit provocative about it, and ask the two panelists, what do you think is the EU's biggest weakness in communication? Because until you know what the weak spots are, you can't really set about patching them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can start. Weakness, I never like to speak about weakness, but the biggest challenge, and the one that just means that we need to be, so much more, let's say, innovative and work so much more together, is that we have a European Union which is both having, let's say, a destiny that unites us, and of course, a huge diversity in the communities that constitute our Europe. It's our wealth, it's our strength. We need to figure out how we play to that strength in our communication. We have all the different languages, we have all the different cultures, we have all the different, we don't have one European government. We have a European democracy which is unique in its constitution and in its diversity. And that is our challenge, and that's the challenge that we need to face up to in the way that we work together and share our communication practices. So I think it's a strength, but it's also a challenge. A weakness, no, I wouldn't say so. It's a weakness which is perhaps more tangible is the fact that we still don't communicate sufficiently in the compelling ways that make sense to people about what the European Union does. There's still too many things, too many benefits which are too well kept secrets. We need to change that. We need to make it known what kind of difference Europe makes in people's lives.
I think the weakness for me is that we haven't yet found the sweet spot that exists somewhere between the Union being an interesting, vibrant political space that engages all of our citizens on the one hand, and being seen as a completely transactional kind of animal on the other. What I mean by transactional, whereby one of our speakers, for example, yesterday said, well, yeah, but in the Council, in the European Council, you agree something, and then 28 ministers or heads of state go out and give a different version of events. Of course they do. They have elections in 6 months or 3 weeks or in 9 months, not in 5 years, like the European Parliament. The European Council and the ministers in the Council of the European Union are always being renewed. So they don't have the luxury of having an election at the same time as for the European Parliament, and then being able to concentrate on business. And that's just a fact of life, and that's not going to change as well. Now, there are many terrible things about the one word that nobody has mentioned so far in this panel, the B word. Terrible things economically, culturally, politically, geopolitically, at a human level as well. They contributed, all those things, to what felt like a few years ago to be almost like a near-death experience of the Union, right? But perhaps one consequence was, for the first time, we had a real measure, a real meter of what non-Europe looked like. We've had lots of reports by economists and academics about the price of non-Europe, but citizens never read those. 500 million Europeans never. Now, on radio, television, newspapers, everybody grasps better the cost of non-Europe. Because you see it in Brexit. So perhaps, maybe I'm being optimistic, maybe I'm being a little bit naive, but maybe a silver lining is that that helps push us towards that sweet spot where politics here is interesting, but it's not completely transactional, with everybody forgetting what the single unifying underlying message is of the Union is a community of sovereign states where we are better together.
Thank you for that. And we went 53 minutes without mentioning Brexit, which I think is some sort of record. Well done. Congratulations, everyone. With that, we're going to wrap up because I'm going to hand over the floor now to Marco Markula, the first Vice President of the European Committee of the Regions.
Dear Jennifer, dear Pia, dear Paul, greetings to Jaume as well. Dear EuropeCom participants. We have heard along this 10th edition of the EuropeCom that communication is the key, but both definitely crucial in shaping Europe and in getting it closer to the citizens. This is true. Let me here start, however, by picking up something from yesterday, because communication without the content is not much. And then listening yesterday in the evening reception, something I picked, thanks Pia, you used two key messages, sharing and learning. And now looking forward, what's said here, together. So maybe sharing, learning together. And I think these are the three things that we should always remember, and especially take an example of the SDGs. Our crucial target is to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And key on that, definitely we need to share the experiences, the good practices, the latest knowledge. We need to learn, not only young people in schools, but we all need to learn out of all of those 17 SDGs and how to move ahead. So looking forward and always working together. I think this is a crucial thing that when we sum up, so what these 2 days very much have as well been. And thank you, Jennifer, for giving this kind of crucial message today. So as well, so bringing these elements together, and so how to tackle the targets. Let me highlight as well this risk of falling into the trap of misinformation, in particularly through social networks. But that has been discussed a lot and will be discussed. When it comes to communicating the EU, sometimes I feel we miss the target because we miss the opportunity of working the information together. Today, thanks this closing as well, very pleased that we have had here today the General Directors of Communication of the Parliament, the Council and the Commission. And they all highlighted this need to work together on a common targets, and that's where we all can influence, both the politicians but especially communication experts. It is indeed crucial that among the institutions we streamline our communication if we want to reach citizens and stakeholders, as we want to build trust for the future of Europe. Therefore, I have three priorities, just messages to you. The first, that really, as actually already said, join our efforts and to let go of the silo approach that has hampered EU communication efforts very much until now. This is not always possible. Every politician or every organization has some of its own targets. They need to take that into account. But when we think about on a broader scale issues, so then moving together. Or if we think about some issues from the recent months, the Western Balkans issue or the negotiations of the future budget, we understand that there are different own thinking by the member states, although that we definitely would like to move much faster ahead for the what I could call change management renewal. Yet when we stand behind the same political line and objectives, notably when enshrined in the treaty or in international approach to tackle these SDGs, there we can work much more together towards a new societal innovations. What can help is having a common branding, focusing a few priorities from the content side, and on that, so the next years for sure will be very much based on the SDGs and how we can tackle those. Not only in Europe, we need to see our responsibility for the whole global. Or if we take young people, their voice, a fear about do we have the global anymore available living planet in the next decades or so. We need to answer to that challenge. This leads to the second priority, innovative communication. Just as innovation is at the heart of all scientific, economic and social development, it has to be at the heart of all our communication efforts. New tools have and continue to emerge to change and reshape the way messages and information are conceived and delivered. Even though not particularly new as an overall phenomenon, social media continues to be a game changer, and that's a reality, actually, as we saw here in this voting as well. Fake news and disinformation campaigns represent a clear threat when it comes to the EU communication. The Cambridge Analytica scandal showed the dangers due to the misuse of data collected through social media. We thus need to base our communication on the newest possibilities and develop strategies and tools to counter looming dangers without forgetting traditional media, which continues to be perceived as the most reliable source of news. Driving for a full media mix. And there is a need to involve all stakeholders, not unlike the EU's efforts through citizen dialogues and other participatory processes. We, the Committee of the Region, we've done a lot in these dialogues with the citizens. We continue to do that in the future as well. Our third priority is looking the audience and your age, so especially thinking about the youth. In our communication plans and more importantly in our long-term strategies. If we want to innovate EU communication, we need young people to be with us and to guide us for the next steps to be taken. This also implies to set up partnerships with national education systems, and as I said in the beginning, learning is crucial, lifelong learning. What then? Think about how we need even to offer a new vocabulary alongside solid narrative if you want to be understood. As 40% of voters in the European elections were under 35. We know that young people hold a great interest in Europe, and we must not miss the opportunity to harness this. Simplification of our policies is not enough. Politicians and public communicators need to learn to speak with simpler vocabulary, not only using new technologies. We should not be scared to call commissioner. Maybe we should call them a European minister in the everyday language. And the MFF, we should call the budget, especially when we communicate with the people. Or Paul, you said very important things, so nothing kills creativity more than the committee. Think where we are now, at the premises of one of the committees. I have faced this issue several times. Last, very strongly in New York, the end of September, when I tried, okay, we are an important body representing all the cities and regions in Europe, but we were committee, and when think about the US or organizers from all around the world. One of those committees. We have hundreds of thousands of millions of committees. So is that the right way to have this message to go through? Maybe, as said, sometimes we should clearly talk that we are kind of a senate of the cities or regions, or I would call you to create something new. What could be a practical term to call this assembly or the committee of the regions? We have 350 members, 350 alternates coming from all parts of Europe and having a strong voice of the citizens in the back. These mayors, regional councillors, presidents, they tackle the needs of citizens in their everyday work there at home. And then we come to Brussels, not every week, but regularly a few times of the year. Therefore, I'm very happy that EuropeCom has such a young audience and provides each year a platform to exchange innovative approaches and learn from each other. I would like to thank all of you for your fresh ideas. We, our people, members who have participated, our administration, communication staff, will bring these elements back to us. And as we discuss with a few of our members during these days, so take the few of the highlights and bring that to all of our members as well. Let me also thank our partners from the Parliament, Council and Commission, as well as the European Investment Bank and the European Economic and Social Committee for their support in making this conference happen and growing over the years. Let this not be a one-off occasion, but a starting point for a more consolidated communication and for the institutions to further share not only knowledge, but share tools, joint effort for looking forward communication. Thank you all.
And thank you very much, Markku Markkila, head honcho of the Gang of Regions Senate. Your lunch is already outside, and thank you for your patience. We're only 6 minutes late.